Okay, so let's start with Bob Cratchit. I would assert that Bob Cratchit's a flat character. In fact, I would posit that almost all of the very vivid, very interesting characters in The Christmas Carol are flat. Some might even argue that Scrooge is a flat, although dynamic character. But there are plenty of people who might rightly disagree on that point, which I will address shortly. As for Bob Cratchit, his character can be summed up in a sentence. As Scrooge's clerk, a kind, mild man who, although treated harshly by his boss, remains a humble and dedicated employee. We see no internal complex and no complexity of character. Tiny Tim is simply an optimistic and loving character Charles Dickens created to make his readers sympathize with the plight of the poor. The ghost would also be flat. For example, take the Ghost of Christmas Present. He is jolly, eating and drinking and making merry in excess, and his primary purpose is to emphasize the difference between the haves and the have-nots to Scrooge. We do not miss him when he exits the play because he was not developed in a complex way that made him feel, back to the portraiture analogy, three-dimensional and multifaceted. Now, I've had discussions with a number of teachers on Scrooge's character, and I've read some articles on the subject, and we're not all in agreement. Literary analysis is fascinating in that way. As long as your assertion is well evidenced and fits within the agreed upon descriptors of a literary term, you've done your job, regardless of whether or not there is a consensus. Some critics argue that Scrooge begins as an unsentimental character who has only one value, and that is, basically, he who obtains the most money wins. After being reminded of those that he loves and the slights that turned his heart to stone, he becomes a sentimental gentleman who values bringing joy to others. He is dynamic, so we have two different versions of Scrooge, but each can be summed up simply in a sentence that captures his basic essence as a character. However, others might cite evidence making arguments that Scrooge is more round than flat. Much of their evidence can be found during Scrooge's time with the three ghosts, in which he struggles internally, which ultimately leads to his change in values and personality. We see a great capacity to love at war with a set of values constructed out of insecurities and resulting from pain and loss. I'm really curious how you would categorize Scrooge. Please answer in the form. Remember, the issue is thus whether a character is drawn with some complexity or whether it is the embodiment of a rather simple set of traits.